This is Johnston, packet tracer 7613. On this packet tracer, I thought it was necessary to actually move the network, make it a little bit bigger so it's easier to actually put all the IP addresses in here and the subnet mask. That way it's a lot easier to figure out how to do all the settings, which I'm going to start with PC1B. And here, we're just going to make sure it's turned on. We go to config, and if we just look at the chart here, we'll figure out what the gateway is, and also what the IP address is. And it's 172.160.2 with the subnet mask of 255.255.254.0. With the gateway of 172.16.1.254. The DNS server would be what our Eagle server is, which is 172.16.3.61. Make sure to turn your ports on, otherwise they won't work. Now we're going to set up PC1, which is very similar to PC2, and it's going to be 172.16.0.1 with the subnet mask of 255.255.254.0. And we're going to have the same gateway as we did in PC2, which is 172.16.1.254. The DNS server will still be the Eagle server, which is 172.16.3.61. As always, check to make sure the port's turned on. Now we're going to set up R2 Central. We're going to set up our FA0/0 to 172.16.1.254, which is going to be basically the gateway address for PC1 and PC2. And it's going to be 255.255.254.0. And just make sure that port's turned on. And because we're missing a serial connection, we actually have to add it to our router here. So you have to connect the serial to the serial, otherwise it won't work for the internet connection, which I'm just showing you in text here that you need to connect it. Now we're going to go ahead and add it in, but we have to turn off the router first, and then put it in there into the slot, and then turn your router back on. And now you have to wait for it to actually completely turn on. It takes a minute, and then you can configure it from there. And because other routers configure for 64,000, I just went ahead and made the same setting for each one for the clock speed. Now we have to set up the serial IP address. So that one is going to be 172.16.3.97, and our subnet mask is going to be 255.255.252. And this was the hardest part for me to set up for doing the port forwarding and you just have to look at the instructions closely. Essentially, they just want you to do a default route, which a default route, you have the IP address as 0.0.0.0. Same thing for the subnet mask. They're going to be all zeros. And because now we have the serial port, of course, I just hooked up the serial port between two routers. And the next hop would be the port. We're going from the one serial port where we are now to the R1 serial port. So its IP address will be the one that we'll be using. So if you look on here, it'll be 172.16.3.98. And always save your settings, otherwise if the router gets shut off by electrical storms or anything else, you'd lose all the settings that you put into it. And now let's go ahead and set up our 400 host. So it puts the IP address as 172.16.1.254 with the subnet mask of 255.255.254.0. And make sure that you definitely turn it on. Save your settings again. So now we'll go ahead and set up R1. And the first thing we'll set up is the serial interface, which we're going to go ahead and put our IP address, which is 172.16.3.98. with a subnet mask of 255.255.255.252. And we make sure that we turn it on. And then next we'll go ahead and set up our 40 host on our fast Ethernet 0/0, which will be 172.16.3.62. And with the subnet mask of 255.255. 255.192 to hold those 40 hosts. And then go ahead and save your configuration. And here in our static routes, we'll actually have to create two routes. So we're going to have to create one that goes to the 400 host and one that goes to the 40 host. From our original configuration, you can figure out your network address, which would be the 172.16.0.0. And now we have to support the 400 hosts, so we got to do the 255.255.254.0. Our next hop would be the R2 Central's serial interface, so it would be the 172.16.3.97, because we're connecting from our serial to the next serial to get to those 400 hosts. And now we have to connect to the 40 host, or basically our DNS server. our network to hold the 40 hosts would be 172.16.3.0, and our subnet mask would be 255.255.255.192. And then our next hop, of course, would be the DNS server, which would be the 172.16.3.61. Then you want to go ahead and save those settings, and then double check all of your settings. Now let's go ahead and set up our DNS server under the config tab, which it's turned off, so we had to go ahead and turn it on. And then we'll go ahead and we'll set up our IP address for it, which would be the 172.16.3.61. And our subnet mask would be the 255.255.255.192. And then our default gateway in this network is 172.16.3.62. And then your DNS server, you could just use the same address as your DNS server right now, which is the 172.16.3.61. Now let's go ahead and set up our services and turn our HTTP on, since we're going to be setting up and turning on our DNS services, which shows in the directions right here. And then go ahead and turn your DNS on and put the eagle-server.example.com for our website. Then our address will be the 172.16.3.61. Now I'll show you that the packet tracer is all 100% complete and done exactly as the instructions show.